My name is Lior Shekel. I'm going to talk to you today about how to launch a hyper-casual game in 2022. Before I go into the details, just a little bit about me. So, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at ironSource. For over the past 3 years, I've been working closely with all of the hyper-casual developers, from the biggest names in the industry to smaller developers, walking them through their entire UA strategy, monetization strategies from the very first launch of the game all the way to scaling up. Today, my team is doing both UA and monetization, and that's a bit about me. As I mentioned, I worked at ironSource, which is the platform empowering the app economy. Basically, it's a mediation platform and an ad network, and that's it. Cool. So, before I start, just wanted to mention that this is my first time talking on stage, so if I'm a little bit nervous, please be patient. All right. So, how to launch a hyper-casual game. Basically, we're going to walk through the entire funnel of launching a hyper-casual game, from the initial marketability test that you as game developers should start on social, all the way to automation, scaling up, and basically making as much profit and revenue as you can from your game. Cool. So when we go into the stage one, so run a marketability on social networks. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this. Probably most of you here know this stage much better than I am. But when we talk about a marketability test, the very initial one, we're talking about testing it on Facebook, right? Why Facebook? It's a simple integration. It's a self-attributed MMP. It's cheap. It's fast. You get a vast audience. You guys all know this. But this gives you an idea if your prototype and if your game is going to be good, it's going to be a success, and if it matches your initial KPIs, of course, before you start putting much more effort into the game itself. So as we said, stage one, you're going to test on Facebook, and then you're going to open basically the other social networks: Google, Snap, TikTok. Today, growing more and more, becoming very popular for prototyping and for initial marketability tests. Once we finish that, and of course we get initial KPIs that are positive and that are good, we want to run a marketability test on the SDK networks. Why? So with the changes that happened in the ecosystem in the last couple of years, with IDFA deprecation, iOS 14, COVID, different trends that happened, we see that the gap between performance on social networks and the gap on SDK networks in terms of performance, in terms of scale, has become even bigger and larger than it was before. And so you need to run also a marketability test on the SDK networks. At the end of the day, SDK networks are what have big scale. They'll be able to bring your game to the biggest audience that you can, making it revenue generator for you and for your company. So a little bit about what is a marketability test that we're talking about, right? So at the end of the day, marketability gives you the idea if your game is going to be able to be competitive in the ecosystem and reach the vast majority of audience that you want, right? You want it at the end to go viral. That's what you want every hyper-casual game, to have as many users as possible. And marketability basically is a factor of eCPM, right? How competitive are you in the ecosystem, in the pool of campaigns that every network has? And the eCPM basically will tell you your buying power for users. And the eCPM factor for eCPI and IPM, right? Now, eCPI, the metric that we're all looking for, making it as low as possible in order to get as much profit as we can. And your IPM, which is a bit easier to manipulate, I would say, by using improving your creatives, ASO, your app store, CPP, etc. Okay, so how do you maximize your eCPM? Basically, you need to tackle one of these factors. when we're looking at the overall eCPM trend or graph and how to basically measure if your game is marketable. So we've divided it basically into three areas. Now, I didn't put here any eCPM benchmarks because obviously they vary, right? They vary by OS, they vary by country. But this is something that I'm sure that your ad network will be able to give you more or less the eCPM benchmarks. But if we're looking at the red zone, so if you're getting an eCPM that's around there, your game is not marketable. Basically, back to the drawing board, okay? Start working, improving your game, improving your IPM, improving your CPI, okay? Or if you feel that you can't, then move on to your next project. Then you would go into the yellow zone, that's the next one, and your game there is a marketable game. You'll be able to launch it, you'll be able to buy users, good users, quality users, and start getting scale and making revenue and working on it. And then finally, and those are the big hits, the green zone, we call it the fun zone. This is where you can enjoy your game, you can enjoy scale. Your eCPM is very competitive, all right? So if you're looking at the pool of all of the campaigns that are running around through every network and every auction and every bid, your campaign is generating the highest eCPM, and you're able to market it, go viral. Most top charts game or big hits that we all know, love, and heard of reach somewhere in this green area. Now, how to test marketability. So, yes, ironSource, I know, that's where I work, created the first marketability tool for SDK networks. Now, this tool, it basically helps you to predict if your game is going to be marketable on SDK networks, okay? The tool works in a way that it works on a smart algorithm that buys you users from, on one hand, it's trying to explore as many sources as possible, but on the other hand, it's trying to pinpoint it to the most relevant sources. So if you have a hyper-casual game in a puzzle subcategory, this is where it's gonna focus on buying in order to predict its best, what is the potential of your game, okay? Understand how you look based on against your competitors, okay? Because that's very interesting. At the end of the day, you're targeting the same audience as your direct competitors and competing games are. Okay, so it runs on, as I said, on a separate algorithm, buys you users, okay? And it outputs basically a score from 1 to 5. Now, this score represents 1 being the red zone or non-marketable, and going into 5 is the green zone. It's a very marketable game, which means it's going to probably perform very well. You're going to be able to buy a lot of users and scale your game. Another thing that it gives you, so when you upload your campaign into our marketability, of course, you use a creative, you have the store ready and everything, but the output that you're getting is both the eCPI recommended in order for you to be able to actually scale your game, and what is your average IPM, okay? So if you're looking at the graph over there, you'll see the red dot is you. I have this. The red dot is you, and all of the blue dots are your direct competitors, which the tool identified based on the genre, on the subgenre that you've set. And you can see, so in this case, the IPM and the eCPI, the combination puts you in the green zone, meaning your campaign is marketable, and you're able, and the recommendation basically is to make the final preparations and launch the game, okay? Here's a success story by a company I'm sure all of you know, Pantheon, who are here, maybe even in the crowd. I actually don't see any faces, so calming me down a bit. But they've put Airport Master on the marketability tool and tested it for 2-3 days and got an output score. I don't remember the exact number, but somewhere around 3.5. And they said, okay, we're going to go for it. Okay, so if you remember 1 to 5, 3 would put them in the yellow zone, which is still recommended to launch. The game was a big hit, #1 in the UK, top 10 in the US. And what they saw and the feedback that we got is that The SDK marketability actually matched the Facebook marketability, and they actually saw that it really brought them to where they were expecting. Cool, so we've done all of that, okay? We've tested our games, we understood it's gonna be marketable on social, it's gonna be marketable on SDK networks. We wanna go for it, the IPM is good, CPI, CPMs, all of the KPIs are looking good, great. Before we launch, again, we go back to the game and start implementing your ad monetization and actually working on your content, okay? So adding more levels. A/B testing, all different strategies within game, adding the basic economy, and basically making the game, a full experience that you could use, you can enjoy, and your users will get addicted to and come back to. And of course, you will have all your ad strategy, ad monetization, and basically start making profit from this game. And now we enter the soft launch, okay? So when we're talking about a soft launch, we're talking about the initial launching of the game, okay? And we've identified two strategies. Each one has its upsides and its downsides, obviously, because nothing's perfect. But basically, it's when we're going soft launch, and I'm going to go into the strategies in a minute, we're talking about launching in the entire ecosystem, right? We normally would launch, so you did the marketability, the initial testing on the socials, then you went on the SDKs, and now you want to go global, okay? And you want to start with every single ad network, every social network. Basically, you want to use as much buying power as you can in order to make your game a hit. In some cases, you will see that the initial launch will be only on social networks and only then adding the SDKs. But we see that in most cases, most successful cases, the launch happens across the entire networks. So as I mentioned, there are two main methods for launching a game. First one is, forget the names, but the all-in launch, and the second one is the conservative launch. And what is the difference between them? So one of them, you can imagine, is a little bit more aggressive, whereas the other one is more of a soft launch kind of strategy that takes a little bit more time, but you're staying on what we call the safe side. All right, so the all-in launch, okay? So the bottom line of this launch, you get as much scale, you reach the charts, you get a higher amount of organics, okay? But your profit KPIs are probably going to be lower than what you were expecting, okay? And what this strategy is talking about, as the name is all in, okay, it starts with a higher bid, okay? Now this is important because when your game enters the pool or the network's campaigns, it's being tested and it's being competed with all of the other campaigns that are running. And when you start with a higher bid at around 20%, let's say, depending on you, but this is the recommendation, you're entering with much more buying power, okay? And what that means at the end of the day is that, I didn't put it up here, but we know that first sessions deliver a higher IPM than, let's say, the fourth or the fifth session, okay? Now, if you start initially with a higher bid, you're able to increase your eCPM, and you're able to enter, to buy from the specific sources at a higher session depth. This means that you're going to get a higher IPM, so your eCPM is going to grow even more. And then once, as you can see here, we're going to walk through it, you lower your bid, your IPM is still higher than it would have been if you would have started with a lower eCPI. And then there's kind of this loop, right, that you're started with a high bid, you have a high CPM, and it generates a higher IPM, and it goes on, and you're able to stay competitive for a very long time. Now, of course, this is a risk, right? And I'm assuming all of you would say, yeah, great, but who is going to fund this 20%? So, yes, I know it costs more, and that's why the recommendation is to cap these campaigns at around $500, $1,000. To make sure that you guys are not overspending your budget and that you're still maintaining your revenue and profit. And then The next stage would be to start lowering your bid by no more than 10% each time, okay? And every time you lower by 10%, you increase the cap, you add another $500, $1,000 to your daily budget in order to buy more and more and more. And you do that, okay, that 10% decrease, cap increase, until you reach your sweet spot. That should normally take between around 3 days, okay? In some cases, it can be faster, depending how much on it you are. And that's when the recommendation is basically to start granular bidding, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. And just an example, so if you look here at the graph of the impressions per eCPI, you can see that they started, okay, yeah, this is more than 20% eCPI, but started with a very high bid, got a big amount of impressions. As the bid dropped, the eCPI started to dropping. The impressions, of course, started going down, but this is the first 24 hours of the game, right? So that drop is also depending on rush hours and time of the day. But you can see that after that, and it continued to scale up. And this is the strategy that goes, as we said, goes aggressive, goes all in, and when you want to, what we call, penetrate the market very hard. Method number 2, okay, and this is a more conservative launch, which puts profit first, okay, stable. It's slower scale, okay, but you still has its advantages, and you're still seeing a lot of big successful games using this strategy. So here, as opposed to the other one, you're going to start with your target bid, okay? You're not going to bid higher than what you're aiming for. You're going to start with your target bid. And because of that, you're going to have no budget, or at least a very high one. The one thing you must remember, you always try to prevent your game from reaching its cap, okay? This is normally harms the learning and the exploration in the initial time. And if your game is, it's on a good trend and it's going in a good direction, you don't want to cap it, you don't want to stop it. Again, we're talking about this strategy. When the bids are high, of course, there is a risk, and that's why we do recommend to cap it. Quality monitoring, okay? We're looking at the ROAS right from the get-go, right from day one, in order to start granular bidding within 4 or 5 days, okay? Now, what is granular bidding? Okay, so it's about bidding per source. So just like none of you will launch a game in the US the same bid as you do with a game in Turkey, let's say, same thing with the sources. You want to bid per source based on the quality that it's generating for you. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Maybe you're buying a ton of installs from a source that's not giving you the good enough ROAS, and you want to lower the bid there and increase it somewhere else. What's interesting you is your overall ROAS, but when you look at it, you want to look at it per source. And you can see in the example here that the launch day, there was a learning phase for the first week. Okay, so this is more correlates with a soft launch, right? Test it, not buying at very high scale, but checking the game KPIs. And then after a week, we started granular bidding in the US, okay? Why US? That's where we've initially launched the game. What you can see that the granular bidding did actually is decrease the eCPI, right? Rather than, as you would assume, it would increase it, and that decrease brought much more impressions. Now, how is that possible? Because we're talking about average eCPI. What we did is the bid increased on the sources that delivered good quality and good scale, and that's where we started getting more impressions, and many other sources dropped their bid. And then 2 weeks in, we opened a worldwide campaign in order to expand it to more audience. Okay, so this is a much more, as we said, conservative launch. It's slower, yet it still brings a lot of success. And here you could see 2 games, the purple and the red, that were launched with method number 1, 2 games that were launched with method number 2. Different times, okay? Obviously, they were not all launched on the same day. And what we saw here is basically the days in the top 10 for iOS US. Why top 10? Because it's very hard to, and also we don't want to share all the impressions and revenue and profit and stuff like that, and this gives kind of an indication of the success of your game. And you can see that game 1 and game 2 that were launched with method number 1 stayed for a longer time or they spent more, but you could see that all of them spent quite enough time in the top charts, meaning all of the launches are good. Yes, some of them spike up, some are a little more stable, but at the end of the day, the total revenue generated from each game was more or less the same. So a bit of a step-by-step. So as we said, when we start, we want to first of all open a US campaign and run one of the two methods that we just discussed, okay? Why do we start with the US? It's the biggest market, the most interesting market. It has the highest ECPMs, highest bids, and basically where most of the money is coming from in our industry. So we always start there. We wait 2 or 3 days, depending on the game, depending on the success, before going global, okay? And also here, you can go global and just go worldwide, or you could start slowly opening it tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, based on the game KPIs that you saw, on your buying power, on the budget that you have, how quickly you're starting to generate profit, and you want to put this profit back into campaigns, into global campaigns. The next step would be to start optimizing based on ROAS, okay, or to start source bidding in order, as I mentioned before, to get more scale from your top sources. And finally, we're going to go into autopilot mode, turn on ROAS optimizer campaigns within each ad network, and basically, reducing the workload for you and for your team. So, a bit of tips for this launch phase that we're talking about. So first of all, timing is super important here, okay? Now, I think most of the people sitting here are either based in Turkey or in Europe, and as we said, launching the game in the US. So yes, that means we need to consider the US rush hours, which is normally between 6 to 10 p.m. In our time zone. And of course, launch it toward the weekend, which is where we're seeing longer retention, more play time. Users are spending more time and more money in the games. So we always want to launch it right towards the weekend, Thursday, Friday, and enjoy the weekend traffic and the weekend KPIs. Always use your top performing creatives that you've probably tested before, be it on social or during the marketability phase. And always challenge the network to try more creatives, new creatives, in order to improve your IPM and increase your scale. Use end cards. When I'm talking about end cards, I'm talking about interactive end cards, playable end cards, okay? Something with a call to action in order to get your users to click on the ad, go into the store, and hopefully also download your game. And use standalone playables. We see that they work well. There are some games that would succeed. 95% of their scale will come from a playable campaign only, okay? Why? Just the mechanic of it, the playable was good, it was interesting. The game itself also has mechanics that want to engage the users with actually downloading the game. As I mentioned before, avoid capping, okay? It harms the learning, harms the exploration stage, and remember to bid per source. Cool, so we've launched the game, we started enjoying it, and we're starting to see scale and users coming in. Of course, our KPIs are now adjusting, our LTV is becoming a lot more accurate and not so much as a prediction, and now it's time to automate and scale up, okay? And the reason that we always want to automate, it allows you and your team to focus more on the app rather than on the UA, and you're able to buy users much more efficiently. Okay, and this is basically the benefits of the automation. Okay, so except for the fact that it frees a lot of your time or your growth manager's time, it also uses a lot of data that is very accurate. So the ROAS optimizers today that many of the networks have are actually not only bidding per source, but they're bidding per user or per ad request. Okay, this is how smart they get. It's something that no human being can do, and that's why the machines and the machine learning are able to do that for us. Okay, this is basically, if I talked before about granular bidding, bidding per specific source, this is even more accurate, and it really finds you and pinpoints the best users for your app and bids for them. And it may vary from, I don't know, a $2 bid to a 30 cents bid for a different user. Of course, it expands your reach, right? You're able to reach many more sources this way, many more users, because you're adjusting your bid all the time. And it always optimizes to scale, always optimizes to profit and to your ROAS goal that you have set out for yourself and for your game, that you see brings you to profitability that you are happy with. Looking at an example for a hyper-casual game, so installs were a bit low, and you can see that a month in, so this was a little bit late. Not everybody follows the best practices. They set the optimizer live, and two interesting things happened here. One, the installs spiked up, okay, and maintained like that for a long period of time, meaning that before using the optimizer, UA guys weren't doing an amazing job, and they missed a lot of opportunities. But what's even more interesting is that the ROAS that they've set out, so you can see that the line here, that's the ROAS goal. Now they're much more accurate to the ROAS goal. They're much more stable and maintaining the game profitability for the entire period that it's running. Okay? And again, all of this happened merely because of turning on a ROAS optimizer and scaling the game. All right, so to sum up, we've discussed all of the stages in the launch, all right? Right from the very first social marketability on Facebook and on the other social channels, moving to marketability tests on the SDK network to understand how your game is going to perform on the SDKs, then working on your in-game, improving your LTV, improving your game content, economy, and of course ad monetization. And finally, going into your soft and global launch using one of the strategies that we saw here today in order to get as much scale as you can, buy as many users as possible, and scale your game quick and safe. And finally, moving to automate, freeing up your time to focus on what you guys do best, which is building games, and buy much more much more efficiently, with much more buying power, and at a very big exploration. So thank you very much for joining. I hope it was interesting for you. And if you have any questions, you can catch me here. I'll be at the event today.